Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And welcome everybody. Welcome to the Cash American Knowledge Team meeting of 2025. Can you believe it? And here we go. I thank you all for being here. We are trying to carry on with the teachings and trying to be relevant in a way and keep up with Mr. Kesh as he's moving the technology away forward at an extremely rapid rate. And so this is another episode of the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Plasma Science class. We're discussing basic inertia. I'm introducing a word called out tensity. Well, it's actually two words. My name is Alexander. It is January the 26th of 2025. And this is part of the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So welcome everybody as we're trying to condense the teachings in a way that it would be attractive for newcomers to come in and gradually migrate from the basic understanding of physics to the basic understanding of the plasma science. And we have over 6,000 hours and now we've gone into 11 years of teaching. And so that is quite a challenge. And so if anyone's asking you, can you explain to me plasma science in 35 seconds? Just say no. There's a lot to learn, and it's part of our life. This is what life is actually all about. And so one of the reasons we're talking about out tensity here is because the intensity of the hesitancy highway, which is the lowest energy state, is keeping us, shall we say, grounded. And we wonder who is in the way or who is in whose way. And as we're moving along, we really need a good cup holder for our cups of life, don't we? Because we have to stay on track. And maybe life is a competition, or life is a contention for trophies. Or is life the display of the tensity of winning? And what does it mean to be winning? Understanding, of course, that when there are winners, there are losers. So this is our search for outer space. And this out tensity is a struggle. It's a struggle to find the plasma highway to our pie in the sky. And that struggle is not so much a victory where some are more equal than others, but it is a victory for our planet as a whole. And this is what we've been trying to discuss, as the books of Merit Koikesh are saying, that in book number 1, we have the universal order of creation of matters. And so here's what's really, really significant, is the bringing together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And in the context of what we're talking about today, if we could say that the product of the universal order of the creation of matters is one of intensity. And so when we are looking to connect, shall we say, one to another, as we see in book number 2, it's the structure of the light. And to understand the structure of the light is to understand the relationship between what we call intensity and outtensity. And that this is the key theme of today's class, because here we have a departure point from one form of intensity and a delivery to another form of intensity. So would the transference of energy from one to the other imply that there must be an outtensity? And this is what I'm suggesting. So in book number 3, we see the origin of the universe, where the one field creates the two fields. And so what's very interesting, of course, is that when you look at these two fields, there is a prescribed distance between what we call man's universe and the sister universe. And also, we find that based on this particular picture, the origin of the universe suffers its demise. And does it have to? And so we keep asking more questions, and this is good, because for 362 weeks, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council have been trying to bring forward the concept of one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And there's a specific reason for that. And it isn't about world domination. It's about unification of us as a species of humanity. So here we are, and we have come to this planet based on the universal laws. But, we have another set of laws, the 10 Commandments that most of us have been brought up with, and which we, shall we say, respect in each of us in our own way. And then we find there's another 24, and another 14 for a total of 24. So when we have varying levels of respect for the first 10, at what point do we graduate to incorporate the other 14? And that means there is no time frame. Each of us has our own time frame. And the reason for understanding that is because there is a plasma highway that is continuous. And we know that because when we look at the universe and we see how well organized it is. And so when we look at where we are, well, we're in the transmission highway, which is based on frequency. And it is also the lowest energy state. So it has an affinity to what we call carbon 12. And then if we want to, shall we say, elevate to the interaction between carbon 14 or carbon 10, and then we find that the addition of these two carbons is actually 24, and there's that number. And so we find that that number is double carbon 12. And then, of course, if we go to the next level, which, of course, is the transmutation highway, and this is what we're exploring, we find that there's another two fields, but they have changed. The one is carbon 16 and one is carbon 8, and the total still remains 24. So this is how things are in the universe, and here we are, we're trying to remain grounded, and we want to set up our foundation. And every good foundation has a cornerstone. And how do you end up with a cornerstone in a series of fields that are actually overlapping and not giving you any direction as to how we go from one field to another field? But when we do the simple math and we look at the carbon as one track and we see the ratios, so we have to understand that there's a coming to and a going from. So in reality, the carbon 12 is actually two carbon 12s. And the relationship is 1-to-1. And so if we were to go into the transmutation energy state, the ratio changes 1.4-to-1. And if we go into the transmutation ratio, well, it's 2-to-1. So that kind of makes sense with respect to the elevation, but we see that, it's in very simple numbers, and our universe is far more complex. And so this is why we're talking about the basic inertia, because what we're talking about is the amalgamation of the fields and our understanding of how these inertia fields are coming together. But there is a contention between these inertia fields because we haven't decided where they are or what they are. And so what we understand is in terms of our physicality, and we say, okay, well, this is part of the transmission energy state level, which is an amalgamation of the X, Y, and Z axis. And we see the field strength reflected in the salinity. And then from there, we can create things. And so that becomes part of the transition dimension. And wherever we are in that transition dimension is an inertia field. So it's a coming together, not just of two, but actually of three dimensions coming together. And then if we want to progress to the transmutation dimensions, then we have to take the three dimensions of the transition dimensions and create another inertia field, the transmutation. And that has to have some kind of tension, because that becomes a point of contention of inertia. And in that point, that becomes gravity. And so that becomes the medium. One moment, please. Now, I often refer to the surface to volume ratios because not only mathematically does it kind of justify the pi, because it's 3.14 and a bit and a bit and a bit. And so it's kind of, really kind of flaky, isn't it? But that is how we observe things. We're not very precise, so we try and fudge things. So, to be very precise and say 1 and 1 is 2, well, that's very, very basic. But in reality, 1 and 1 cannot be 2, because we still have the 1, which is part of a feeding dimension, and we have another one, not necessarily the same one, and that's part of the feeding dimension. So we have two feeding dimensions, and then we get a feedback dimension. And so that's the third dimension. So 1 and 1 is 2 in terms of a combination, shall we say an inertia field, but all three fields remain. There is no demise of any one of these fields, because in the universe, you cannot create garbage. So unlike in a factory where we may produce something and then create garbage and throw that away, there's no way to throw in the universe. So whatever we create in one feeding dimension, we also create in another feedback dimension. And we need to have this feedback so we know how much to feed, because Otherwise, we would just keep feeding and feeding and feeding, and with no feedback, we don't know what we're doing. So as an observer, we need this feedback. And as an observer, then we're none of these three dimensions. We are in a fourth dimension, and this is the kind of the key to the understanding, because when we start to analyze all the various dimensions, then we start to realize that, well, wait a second, there are multiple dimensions, but there are multiple field strengths. And within each field strength is another series of multiple dimensions. So we could have a field strength in the atomic state, another one in the nanostate, another one in the GaN state. And there has to be a balance because we're dealing with the conservation of energies. But then there's also a conservation of energy transfers between the states. And there has to be a balance. So we can go from, say, a balance in the GaN state to a balance in the nanostate. Well, how does one balance when one is an order of magnitude stronger than the other? So this becomes our understanding on how to balance and maintain equality, because there has to be an equality. But an equality does not mean net zero. Equality means that there could be a creation or there could be a decay. And what's important to understand is that there is a transfer state. And within that transfer state, it has a dimension, which is a manifestation of the inertia fields of the originating dimensions. So to get to the transfer state, we have to come from a series of three dimensions. And then to leave the transfer state, we have to go to another series of dimensions. So to understand, we have to understand that there's two directions to this. This is just a plasma junction. We are not implying in any way which direction we're going, because when we look at the creation of the universe, we see that it exists from energy. So the energy on its own is always positive. So the charge that we give to energy, whether it's positive or negative, is actually indicative of its motion. And energy is always in motion. And so, as we said from the cover of book number 1, the universal order of creation of matter is the bringing together of the matter, dark matter, and the antimatter, is brought together by a tension. And that tension is gravitational. And then when it's brought together, that means it came from somewhere. And so obviously, if it came from somewhere, it can also go somewhere. And so that therefore all things are working in combination. That is to say that each and every matter is working in combination, and the combination of the matters are also working in combination. And so this now gives us a whole broader understanding where we could stay at one energy state, or we can migrate to other energy states. And then how do we make that decision? So the decision is the plasma rule is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So arbitrarily, the gravitational force is stronger than the magnetical force. And so that is the higher strength that feeds. But when you have two magnetical forces coming together, then the question comes in is how do these forces come together where it is mandatory that it becomes gravitational? And if we don't understand how to do that, then it becomes a conflict point. So what we need to do is to change that viewpoint from being a point of conflict to being a binding zone. And in order to do that, it requires a different kind of interpretation. So this is not a point of confrontation, because when you're dealing with a point of confrontation, you're talking about contentious issues. But the kind of tension that we're talking about is a balance between intensity and outtensity. So we're talking about conflict resolution. And within that conflict resolution, we're trying to achieve a point of containment, because that's what construction and creativity is all about. But the way many of us understand this is that it's an energy binding system. Well, it needs to be an energy binding system, and it needs to be self-serving. And this is the way the universe operates. But we seem to extend our understanding of the universe within the realm of the earth and ignore the rest, our little tiny perfect world. So when we're talking about getting energy from anywhere, we're talking about getting energy from the earth, which means at the expense of earth. And it is this characteristic that we have then transferred over to our relationship with others of the humanity species, others of the horizontal species, the animal kingdom, the others of the vertical species, the plant kingdom. And so when we say the kingdom, that implies that there's a hierarchy. Well, we don't respect that hierarchy. We do not respect the hierarchy of the plant kingdom nor the animal kingdom. And so it just stands to reason why we don't respect the humanity hierarchy. So how do we differentiate? And the way we've been told is, well, you see, there's a tensity relationship between the magnetical and gravitational field forces, which are seeking balance. And in the plasma science, we call it a maggrav, a balance relationship. But in the scientific community, we have the balance between the conservation of magnetic fields versus the conservation of energy. And that is restricted to our awake state. And then we have a spiritual scientific community where we have the relationship between the spirit, which is the motor of the soul, and maybe it's part of our dream state. And so we have this tensity relationship between our awake state and our dream state, not understanding that those two work together in a tensity relationship. And this is how the plasma science adds to the knowledge. And the reason this is important is because it affects the rate of change. So we can do things scientifically, and that would go at a certain pace. And we can do things spiritually, and that could go at a faster pace. But when we do things plasmatically, we are doing it at many orders of magnitude at a higher rate. And this is why it's so important, because we only have so much time to deal with this. And when we navigate through our lives, we have to ensure that we can be self-serving, because we have to be able to be self-serving to be able to give to others, and who also need that self-serving capability. But with the feedback that we're getting on this planet, there's a deficiency. So the cups of life are a supplementation of this deficiency. And we find that this is the process of what we call the monatomic science. And so that was very, very basic, but in it we produced ganses. And those ganses were representative of our inner space. And so many of the things that were part of the cups of life was the radiance manifestation of different ganses, such as CO2 gans, calcium gans, zinc, copper gans, amino acid gans, water gans, for instance. And then, of course, there are a whole bunch of other elements. And so here we even introduce a gold gans. But the thing is that these are all part of what we call a plasma feeding. And so when we look at our own self-serving needs, we need to be fed. And the problem, of course, is that when we're hungry, then we need to be fed. But when we are full, are we satisfied? So we find that there's a certain number of meals per day, or there's a certain number of things that we need in our life. And then the problem comes in is when we have everything in the material world that we need, and there are people who do have all that. And does that bring happiness? Does that guarantee happiness? Does that guarantee satisfaction? Do you have to have all of that to be satisfied? Or are you still hungry when the universe feeds you? So does the universe feed you? Well, of course, because here we have the one-track cup of man, which is the combination of the emotional and the physical field. So what is interesting is that the emotional field is stronger than the physical field. And if it's a stronger field, then that's a gravitational taker. And isn't it the gravitational taker? How many of us are led by our emotions as opposed to our physicality? Well, the truth is that you can't go anywhere without the emotion, because there is no impetus to move unless you're emotionally motivated to move. So the physical becomes the magnetical giver, and it becomes directed. So when we direct that, then we are now looking for the place to direct it. So the question is, what is directing that? And so we have the one-track cup of the soul. So the inertia field of the emotional and the physical coming together has to be directed, and the director is the soul. So now that we have a director, then the question is, what do we direct it to? And so since we are on planet Earth, it's nice to have a brain. And that brain then is a reflection, if you will, of the inertia fields coming from the universe. And within there, the same process of what happens is the same way that we have in the cups of life, where we might have the copper gans, which is representative of our physicality, and the zinc gans, which is our emotional context. And then we have the carbogen, which is the, shall we say, the massaging of the energy fields to produce whatever we need. And that then, as we see it, as we understand it, becomes our physicality, which is nothing more really than the inertia of the mind. But the inertia of the mind with respect to our physicality is interacting with the soul of the man. But in order to complete the transaction, there has to be an inertia manifestation. And in order to complete that, there has to be a place. So parallel to our inertial activities is the soul of the earth and the soul of the physicality of the earth also have to come together to therefore create the inertia field of the physicality of the earth. We need this physicality of the earth prior to coming here. because you can't come nowhere. You have to always go somewhere. So in order for you to have the physicality, that physicality has to manifest in a physical environment. So the earth was here before we physically manifested. And so we know that because look at all the other Ganses that came together in this Earth station, this grand central Earth station of Ganses. And we see all the Ganses and their different colors, and they come all in different densities. And we have a classification system where we see all the details of the Earth space and the range of the details. And what is very interesting, of course, is that these details are in specific locations. So there has to be some kind of prejudice there, that it becomes manifest in one location as opposed to another location. So in understanding these fields of prejudice, we see that the earth in its inanimate state, the way we see it, and in our physicality as human beings in our animate state, we don't see the relationship between the two. And yet the rules are the same. So the energy is magnetical, comes in the form of PM text, comes together and merges with the antimatter, dark matter, and matter gen, and converges into a plasma gen. And from there, there's a conversion to a Maggrav condition. Now that Maggrav condition is gravitational. And then there's another interaction with the gravitational aspect of the Earth. And that creates a field interaction. And within that inertia field, we can have another matter state manifestation. So that matter state dimension is always in a plasma dimension, but there are two characteristics of the matter plasma dimension. One is physical, where you can touch it and see it, and one is plasmatic, where you can't touch it and can't see it. But we are always dominant in our matter state, and we have to understand that the matter state is an inertia field manifestation of other fields that are part of the feeding system. And the matter plasma dimensions are part of the feedback system. And so we like to tell the universe to shut up, because we like to give it feedback. And so we tell it what to do. But, you know, the universe is, shall we say, working in a different plan. And as such, it has bequeathed a gravitational conformation, and the fundamental element that is given us is hydrogen. And that becomes a gravitational tracking that comes together from the universal fields, the Earth fields, and the sun's fields. And so these are all magnetical fields that come together and in turn become gravitational on Earth. So if we say the gravitational fields are intensive, where we're drawing the field to us, we have to maintain this field, and so it creates a tension. And if the sun and the earth and the universe are giving to us, then they must be creating an out tension. And I say tension because there is a connection to the source. So fundamentally, we recognize that we have a source from the sun, and we have a source from the earth. We're just having trouble understanding the source for the universe. And then to understand more of the gravitational conformation, we now introduce oxygen, which is another element. and it's also part of the gravitational tracking. And it has its own fingerprint. It has its own emission spectrum, and it is unique and different from hydrogen. But the method, the way it came, is that the gravitational tracking is a form of intensity. And so the magnetical forces from the sun and the earth and the universal field forces are all part of the out tensity. And so they come together, and we are the benefactors of that. And that's why we came here. That was one of the choices that we made. So we have a body, and it consists of cells. And so when we look at these cells, there's an interesting characteristic in that these cells basically create a field, and we have 73 trillion cells, give or take, and they have a boundary. And so when we look at the way these cells are structured, we can find that there's a lot of pressure on the inside. So the gravitational intensity increases. There's less pressure on the outside, so the magnetical pressure decreases. But there's a communication from the inside to the outside. So if the gravitational pressure is part of the intensity, then the magnetical pressure is part of the out tensity. So that begs the question, when we look at the plasma chain and we say, okay, so this is a field that goes around the core. We refer to that sometimes as their aura. But what's interesting is that they all follow a path, and not the same path, and not the same distance from the core. But one pack of energy flows along this path. There's no track. It's a plasma path. And another one follows, and another one follows. And so you end up like with a plasma chain, and each of these links in the chain, if you will, follow this path. But then there's another path, and it may be closer to the core, and there's different energy packs that do the same thing. They follow the path, and another follows the path, and so we create another plasma chain. But then there's another one that may be farther away, and it follows the same rules, and it creates its own plasma chain. So the question then is, how come we are able to create the same type of plasma chain the way we understand it, where an energy pack is following a path, and yet the distance from the core is different? So the distance of the core is the out tensity, because that's what's determining the distance, isn't it? And so we see the similarity between the plasma chain and the cells. So as we say, when we're looking at the internal pressure, we find that there's a compaction, a coming together of the chain. It has a smaller radius, but it has the same number of components as the outside chain. And so there's an external tensity. So the cellular structure and the plasmatic structure mimic each other. But we didn't say which plasmatic structure, and we didn't say which cell. So what we have to say is that that determination is an out tensity interaction. There has to be one, because when you say a cell, you don't know if it's a lung or if it's a kidney. So there has to be some kind of determination. And there has to be some kind of link and some kind of interaction to determine this plasma chain tracking. So if we go back to the beginning and we say, okay, well, the neutron came before the atom and the PM tick. So the one neutron split up into the atom and the proton, and also the energy that was transacted to do that splitting was a PM tick. And so that PM tick is released from this transaction, and where does it go? Again, we haven't determined that. But based on this basic teaching, we have to assume that the neutron is kind of the universal structure, and that then extends to the atom, which is the electron and proton. And yet we have different elements. We have different ganses. We have different organs. We have different people. In fact, we also have horizontal and vertical people, and they all follow the same rules, and they all started in the beginning. So when we were talking about our humanity coming together, and we said, okay, we find all these energies coming together, and it's not just 1 + 1. We are a lot of us, and we are all here by the same rules. And yet we find that when this manifestation comes together, that there is a color differential on the outside based on field strength, based on frequency, but there's no color differential on the inside in that regard. But what we do have is a breakdown of humanity's civilization, where we have, for instance, different categories such as Asian, Native Hawaiian, Black or African American, or white, or Hispanic, or Middle Eastern, or American Native. And these are all the same 7 civilizations, that they themselves are different, but they have the same story about the Great Flood. So how can we be that divergent and yet be so consistent in terms of our understanding of what's been going on this planet? So the fundamental thing that we have to understand in terms of energy transfer is that there's a sequencing. And so when we talk about the different energy states, and we talk about the lower energy states, so we talk about the magnetic fields, the electric fields, the combination of those two being the electromagnetic, and then we have the atomic, and then the nuclear, the plasma energy, soul of the body, and the soul of the man. And in order to progress through these various energy states, there has to be a sequencing, a prescribed sequencing, so that there is a balance. And so that balance is allocated to what we call the magnetical field forces of attraction and repulsion. So the repulsion is the magnetical feeding, whereas the attraction is the gravitational feed back. So that means there has to be a two-way street. So the natural creation is actually a combination of the attraction and repulsion plus the magnetical fields, and the natural decay ends up being the combination of the repulsion attraction forces plus the gravitational forces. So we say that the natural decay comes to be a maggrav, and that becomes gravitational, whereas the natural creation becomes magnetical. So the magnetical is part of the emission, and the gravitational is part of the absorption. But where's the connection? And this is all based on the tensity, the surface to volume ratio, where the higher surface to volume ratio creates a negative charge, and that negative charge changes. So the smaller something is, the higher the negative charge. So that the tensity of the gravitational encapsulation is stronger. And now that it's stronger, being gravitational, it can be the giver. And it gives. This is why the negative charge is the giver. So, is the tensity the same in all cases? And if it were, well, there wouldn't be any growth. So the growth really comes about as a change in the manifestation of the out tensity, isn't it? So when you have a change, that change is only possible with motion if it's growth. But if the change doesn't have motion, then that growth becomes a bulging. So either way, there's a change in the out tensity, because if there's an absorption of energy and that is changing the gravitational aspect of that maggrav field, then either it's going to grow or it's going to get fatter. And then we could call that fatness, bulging. So the bulging actually means it's a changeable relationship between intensity and out tensity. Now, a dynamic field remains intact. And the conformity is variable. So it's not growing, it's getting bigger. So the conformity remains intact within the field. And the conformity is variable across many fields. As we said, there are 3 dimensions, so that would be 3 fields coming together. And so that bulging is the conformity of overlapping fields. And we see that with the magravs that we created, where we had rotating fields and they created a field, and then those fields worked together and interacted. But they didn't go anywhere. There was no lift, there was no motion. The fields were just getting bigger. Or shall we say, the fields were bulging. And then we look at another phenomenon called bumps. And so when we look inside the field, we tend to think that the core is right in the center, and that is the only core. But there can be other rotating fields within that. Now, how do we know that? Well, because we have different cells in our body, and some cells pertain to the lungs and some to the kidneys, some to the liver. So there are different fields with different intensities. And so they maintain a position. And these bumps can move through this field. Now, let's say this bump is hypothetically a toxicity, and it gets encapsulated, and it needs to be encapsulated by a system that segregates it from the rest of the body so that the body doesn't get sick. And this is a natural effect. Then there has to be some kind of expulsion. So this bump, as it's moving through the field, is moving towards a point of expulsion. And one of those points, for instance, could be the surface of the skin. And so if it does move to the surface of the skin, there, that bump creates a bulging at the surface of that field. So now the question then is, how do we go beyond that? Well, let's look at bubbles. We all like to make bubbles. And we think of bubbles as being round. But really, we can have odd-sized bubbles and variable bubbles. In fact, we can have bubbles within bubbles. And this all becomes a game. It's a game of the tensity. So the bubbles that are inside the bubbles have the intensity, and the bubbles outside have the outtensity. And so there's a balance between the intensity and the outtensity, and as long as that balance is there, the bubbles can remain. Well, we don't want to burst anybody's bubble today, but you know, there's there's a tensity interaction between these bubbles, so they don't have to be round. And we know that because we can make funny shaped bubbles. And the funniest shape of all is the one that we call the humanity bubble. I mean, we don't look very round, do we? We have arms and legs and a head and funny shaped bodies. We have a lot of curves. So we're not round. Even the planet, which we say is round, it's not really round. It has valleys, it has mountains. So it just seems to be round if you go far enough away and you say, well, it's just a speck of dust. But if you magnify that speck of dust where you can really, really see close up, and you will see, well, oh my God, it has a lot of details. So we're not really understanding what causes these details because we just kind of wrap it all up and say, wow, it's a bubble. So don't want to burst your bubble. The thing is that we have different organs within our body, and each of those organs have their own bubble of energy. So when you see the bubbles within the bubbles, that's an intensity interaction. Because all the organs have their own tensity and they all have their own position, but all of them are within the body. And so the energy that is gravitationally stored within the body is part of the intensity. But there are other intensities. There are other organs. There are other gravitational points. And they all maintain their position. They all maintain their function. And it's all based on the interaction of the various intensities. Well, that's good. So now we've got our body. But you have an idea, and that's in your head, and you give that idea to someone else. Now that idea is creating an out tensity. It's a part of you, you gave it, but it's, not part of your intensity, it's part of your out tensity. So the intensity is striving to maintain a tensity stability. And so we can see that there are fields that maybe are created on the inside and need to go out. And so on the surface, we have these bumps, and they too maintain a tensity stability. So how do these bumps that are on the surface, where we have this tensity stability, become these bubbles that are outside of this gravitational stability and become part of the magnetical out tensity stability? How does that happen? Well, let's ask another question. We see Saturn, and it has visible rings. And it also has visible shadows between the rings. There are visible shadows between the rings and Saturn itself, and also visible shadows beyond the rings. And clearly, the body of the planet is different from the rings. So these shadows are gaps in the rings. So there's a clear definition of these rings. And these particular rings are visible. So do other planets have rings? Do all rings have to be visible? Can a visible planet have invisible rings? Well, can a visible human have an invisible aura? Is it possible that the rings have to do something with growth? Or is it possible that the rings have something to do with out tensity? Or is it possible that the rings are a representation of the balance between the intensity, which is the gravitational field force of the planet, and the magnetical force of the rings? And then there's a balance. And not only that, but there's an inside of the ring, which is not attached to the planet. There's an outside of the ring, which defines the border of the ring, but the outside of the ring is farther away than the inside of the ring, which means that the out tensity, which maintains that ring balance, is different from the inside to the outside. And then there's a gap, and then there's another ring, and it has an inside and it has an outside, and those out tensities are different. So if we're just looking at the basic two rings here, where they have a limit on the inside and on the outside to define the ring itself, then that would be 4 different out tensities. 2 rings, each with 2 tensities each, to determine the point of confinement. And that point of confinement is not attached to the planet, but it still is part of the planet. And of course, we assume that it's round. But we know that we're not round. We may have jelly bellies, but what happens when the tensity dissolves? Now you have the gravitational tensity disappearing. So the out tensity of the creation is maintaining its gravitational position, but those bubbles that are part of the bumps on the surface, are they dissolved because the tensity of the main, shall we say, bubble planet is now being dissolved? So there is no rule to say that when the main tensity dissolves, that the bumps would dissolve as well. So what does that mean? That means we have a substitution, which is a transference of the gravitational domination. So at this point of substitution, that point where you go from the intensity being gravitational and the out tensity being magnetical, that point is the balance point of that substitution. And in order to create a substitution where the intensity is substituted for the out tensity, then either the intensity has to equal 0 or the out tensity has to equal 0. So in other words, if the gravitational conformation remains and you create something else, such as an idea or another bubble or something external from yourself, then the intensity has to become transferred or substituted to that bubble. So the out tensity would equal 0. But if that intensity from the primary gravitational conformation is dissolving, then the intensity has to equal 0. And so that entire gravitational conformation gets transferred to the out tensity. But clearly, the amount of energy that is contained within that bubble is far greater than what is manifest into the out tensity transference, the substitution to a new intensity. And so the bubble bursts. And where does that energy go? So a long time ago, we discussed the x-axis transmission and how we seen a car, how it was rolling perpendicular to the ground. But in order for that car to have wheels rotate, there had to be an input rotation, which is perpendicular to the motion. So the output motion is aligned with the rotation. And, you know, that's an excellent feature because you can attach a steering wheel to that and you can go left or right as well. So you can change direction. Well, that's just pretty good. But when you see a car in motion and it's an internal combustion vehicle and it has noise, and as it approaches, you can see that the sound ratio changes. As it approaches, the noise gets louder. So the louder noise is a byproduct of intensity. And when that car passes you and drives away, and we're assuming the speed coming in and the speed going out are the same speed, you will find that that sound begins to diminish. And that diminishing of the sound becomes the out tensity. It's no longer very intense, is it? So there's a change the tensity based on that distance. So obviously, the closer it is to the car being beside you, which that would be the loudest noise. So the closer it is to that determines how loud the noise of the engine of the car approaching is. So when it's far away, there's not much intensity. When it comes next to you, there's a lot of intensity. And when it goes away from you, there's a lot less intensity. And so the representation of this car in motion manifested in the sound ratio is the balance between the intensity and the out tensity. So even though the car is moving away from you and the intensity is diminishing, you can still hear it. And so there has to be a connection. So it isn't just that the intensity is gone, but there's a diminishing of the intensity and is being replaced by the out tensity. And this is the whole purpose of today's discussion. Because what we do know is that there's an anomaly in terms of the rolling, because we always have to have this input. But what if there is no perpendicular input rotation? What if there is no engine? What is if there is no internal combustion or electricity to drive it? What if there isn't a rocket in the trunk? How does the motion keep moving? So we find that if we make a slope on the ground, in other words, the slope is towards the greater intensity, the gravitational intensity, then the output motion is aligned with the rotation still, but now it is pointed towards the greater intensity. And so that becomes the gravitational aspect of it. So what happens when we are on a wild ride? We like to drive our cars fast. So we find that when we are driving with too much intensity, then we have an excessive perpendicular input rotation. So the car literally releases from the planet. There's a gap. And we find that there's even less friction going from an asphalt to a dirt road. So the actual car flying in the air there is a balance between the intensity and out tensity. And in this case, the out tensity is greater. Isn't it interesting that the horizontal people, represented by a dog, for instance, knows how to release the water? And it does this through excessive input rotation. So it is with the rotation that we have the out density. Same thing happens when we're applying a grinding wheel to a piece of metal. We have excessive input rotation and sparks are flying. And the sparks are flying in all different directions. So the intensity that is holding the molecules of the metal together, or the atoms of the metal, have no tensity. It's all out tensity. The intensity is zero. The out tensity is maximum. We do the same thing on lathes with metal. There's a metal release. And with the excessive input rotation, we can break down these pieces of metal. Well, we can do that with wood as well, right? We have a wood release on a lathe. The same thing happens. So what we're doing is we're converting the input intensity to the output out tensity. So there's a change. There's a change in the relationship. And there are those who need to be super skillful at this. Maybe we call them daredevils or motorcycle riders. And so in order to overcome this excessive input rotation, they engage in extreme offsetting. And that extreme offsetting is to maintain their track binding. So the force fields of input of intensity and output of out tensity remain. But in terms, if we want to keep that balance, then there has to be some kind of other force that is applied that can maintain that balance. So when we look at the tensity, and as we've seen with the plasma transmutation tests that we've been running, we see this out tensity separation. And this separation kind of reminds you of when we look at the rings of Saturn, and we're looking at it from one particular angle, but if we were to look at it from the side, as we do here with the rings of Jupiter, we find that the rings, which we've already determined are part of the out tensity, we find that the rings have a separation as well. So we have an inner ring, we have an outer ring, and that determines the ring. But then in order to maintain some kind of mag-rav balance there, we have to have a relationship with another ring. So in other words, two rings. And each of these two rings has an inner ring and an outer ring, and to maintain balance between the out tensity and the intensity. So the creation of the ring has a balance field, and the rings themselves have a balance field. And this balance field can be separated, which means that something can be something as opposed to being something else. And that's all determined by susceptibility. So when we apply that to our field representations of our travels through the transmutation trials and tests, we see a representation of the soul of the man, the soul of the body, and the physicality. And so we can see that there's a connection of the inner space. And then there's a connection of the outer space as well. And then there's a movement. There's an out-tensity interaction that creates a movement where we have the energy on the inside moving through the field and then coming to the energy on the outside. And there, even though it's on the outside, it maintains a connection. So if you're looking at the far right picture, where now the intensity is 0, you don't see the connection of the inner space, and you don't see the connection of the outer space. But what you do see is the connection of the out-tensity interaction, because the intensity of the inner space is still connected to the out-tensity of the outer space. It is unique to each and every one of us. So when we look at the out-tensity location of our organs and their positioning within the body, and they are overlapping fields. So our body has a field of intensity. Our kidneys have a field of intensity. Our hearts have a field of intensity, but the kidney and the heart are within the field of the intensity of the body. And so that is a representation of the out-tensity locating that comes from the soul. And if the out-tensity location of our organs within our body exists, then the out-tensity location of where we came from or where we're going to also exists, because it's a two-way street. So when we look at the humanity civilization and we see that all 7 civilizations on this planet have the same story, and yet we find that this planet, regardless of the fact that we all have this understanding of our intensity, this intensity is translated into conflict, and it becomes very sore. And all of us share that, but some more than others. And that energy doesn't necessarily stay at the core, but it can migrate to the surface and become a bump on the surface. And if you find that one civilization has a problem with its self-serving requirements, and that becomes a point of suffering, it's very easily that the neighbors would share that same suffering. And then if they share that suffering, well, then their neighbors would share that. And now you're understanding how the humanity civilization is under this burden of contention, which is a fight between the intensity and the out-tensity. And when you look at the planets and you see that within the field of the solar system, there is no contention. There is only positioning by nearness and proximity. So, you have the sun space, you have the earth space, moon space, Mars space, and you have these in-between spaces, and it's all well organized. And there's no conflict. But there is motion. And a strange thing about this motion is that everybody follows the track. So what happens when you have an out-tensity manifestation, an out-tensity interaction? So you still have the intensity within, but now you're transferring it out. And then you have this out tensity separation. You give birth to another gravitational construct. So that gravitational construct has to have an intensity. That intensity then is a separation from the intensity of the origin. And there is a connection. And that connection comes about when the out tensity reaches zero. So when you look at the ray motion, which is part of creation, we find that the creation is actually going in two directions. And you cannot have creation without natural decay. You need the magnetical and gravitational aspect of it. But there is a representation of the gravitational and the magnetical. So that it follows its intensity or out tensity. And so that becomes part of the creation. But what about on the decay? Well, you find that decay is an unfortunate word that is also part of the creation, but that creation is a manifestation of physicality. And so we've already discussed that within our body, we have an intensity and we have an aura, which represents our out tensity. And so from our intensity, we connect to our out tensity, and that is how we grow. We go from being a baby to being an adult. And when we grow, the aura also grows. Never will the physical manifestation exceed the aura. It would be impossible because that's part of growth. So what happens to create the separation? So the ray motion is created through the natural creation. And that natural creation is the balance between the intensity and the out tensity. And so that becomes the conservation of susceptibility because we're each independent plasmatic variables. And so we have a magnetical susceptibility and a gravitational susceptibility, and that's all within balance of a MAGRAV condition. But where on the pH table are we balanced? So when we look at the transmutation ratios, we find that there are magnetical plasmatic fields and gravitational physical fields. And then there are acidic fields and alkaline fields. And then break it up into the various quadrants. So depending on how the things come together, so when we look at the earth-space transmutation state, there's an x-axis and a y-axis, which is the coming together of the fields, and the inertial field is the z-axis, which is the amalgamation of the two fields, and there you have your representation. So that becomes our destination, but the outer space transmutation is from our souls. They do the same thing. They come together where the soul of the man and the soul of the physicality come together and then manifest into our transmutation state, which may be plasmatic or may be physical. Up until now, it has only been plasmatic. We're born as a baby and we leave our body behind. But now we have an opportunity to not only go one step beyond the plasma state, but we also have one step beyond to go beyond the Coulomb barrier. So we can go in both directions, from the lowest atomic state to the monatomic to the polyatomic to the plasma field state, and then one step beyond. and then one step beyond that. And that is how we manifest gold, because that is now we are in the beyond Sanya era, where we have been able to manifest the plasma fields, the GANs, and transmute into the physical state the same way that we were born, utilizing the universal energies. So when you talk about the sound, you can hear the car coming and the sound becomes more intense, and you can see the car leaving and you can hear the sound diminish. Now we are in the beyond the ultrasound realm, where we have the connection, where the soul of the man is connected to everything. And what we give our time and attention to is the interaction. So wherever we are is affected by the speed of rotation, because that affects the transmutation transition. That motion is key. And so when we look at our blue planet, we have to understand that oil and water don't mix. And that's because there's an intensity and an outtensity balancing. And the pH of peace is fundamental, because when we look at the universal community and its construct is peaceful. And so if we want to join that and connect, then there are many points on the field strength of the dove. And each and every one of those field strengths is connected through our intensity of life on this planet and our outtensity to what we're connected to. And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And so we're calling all the space plasma scientists to join our research teams and further develop the fields. And for the rest of us, we need to learn about the transmutation flight system so that we understand our destinations to and our destinations from. And so starting in February, March, and April, we will be carrying on with that and advancing the technology, the transmutation technology, which the range of it is a transition, but it transcends the inertia field transmutation dimensions. Each of these is governed by the laws of conservation, and they apply whether it's covalent, trivalent, or tetravalent bond. It doesn't matter. It's the containment of the inertia is manifest through the contention of equality. So the soul of the man cannot be abandoned and it cannot be compromised. And so the color of man is based on this integration with the soul of the man. This is the integrity of man, regardless of the intensity manifestation, all the same. And so we have this nonlinear unity that comes together as a representation of the path links of susceptibility. So the emission of intention and the emission of retention are other forms of describing the intensity and the outtensity. So it interacts to create the emission of intention. And this creates a balance of contention, the contention of equality, which is what we're talking about. And so we have to set up a feeding antenna that also gives back feedback. And we have to tune in to understand that the selection of one force, which is magnetical and is balanced by the force selection of another gravitational force. So we realize that the transmutation then manifests in balance with peace dome, the peace dome of this earth. which is why we came here, the purpose of life. The earth called us here, and we responded. Okay, so we have a job to do to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, trying to achieve the greater oneness. We've been trying to do that for 574 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers workshops. It's been over 11 years. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. So we have to learn about the new selection process of the new plasma science. It requires a world peace treaty. That is something that is not up for negotiation. Sign it with your heart, sign it with a pen, because man is the reactor of a three-dimensional transcendent universe. And our reaction is an inertia field. And this inertia field is part of another inertia field that we can transmute to. There are no straight lines through these field transmutations. So can man go into outer space without a peace dome? Not really. So is the inertia of the present governed by the dimensions of history? Not really. How do we impart the transition of energy states of inertia? So if we understand that the out density is the separation and the connection to the physical transmission dimensions, now we know why the plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this lesson. I really hope you enjoyed this.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. And let's go to our participants and see if it aroused any questions. Anyone? Did Mr. Kesh use other words for outer intensity and inner intensity? Is it just as simple as gravitational and magnetical, or is there more to it? I hadn't heard him use outer intensity before.
Well, that is a word that I have concocted, so I will admit to that.
Okay.
However, in order to understand the plasma science, we have to understand that you cannot have a magnetical field as a standalone field. It has to interact with a gravitational field. Then you go to the point where are all magnetical fields the same size? Are all gravitational fields the same size? Same question.
Or same strength, you mean? Or size?
Well, size, and let's say in terms of diameter, and strength in terms of field strength. Oh, excellent. So if that is variable, so the rules don't change. You need both magnetical and gravitational field forces to work in balance. So the rules don't change, but the strength of the fields do. So where do we have the divide between the combination or the dissolution? Where do we have the combine of the field forces coming together to create one, or as we see in the neutron, that it has the possibility of breaking up into two, right? Isn't that one of the fundamental parts of the beginning? It's here somewhere. It. Oh, is that mark?
Excuse me? Oh, you're looking for a background. Okay. Or one of the foils?
And it's not here.
Yeah, I was interested in those bubbles you were talking about. I haven't been able to boil a cup of water using the fields. I think that would be a great demonstration for people, even if I didn't make the reactors myself, but just putting the cup of water between two small reactors, you could see a lot of bubbles. You could see the creation, to boil a simple cup of water. Have you known anyone that could do something like that, Alex, using the fields?
Not yet.
Yeah.
You see, the from my own point of view, I have tried to understand the science, and that's what I'm doing with these classes. My big question is the science real? Is it correct? Is it following scientific principles?
No, it's actually violating current scientific understanding totally.
Oh, well, is it, or is the current scientific knowledge violating?
Well, again, it's an addition to man's knowledge as we understand it. But yeah, I think we do have it arse backwards in many respects. As he said, trying to handle issues within the physicality rather than going to the energy dimension. As he said, with the RNA or balancing fields in the womb of the mother, you can't do it in the physicality, but we continue to try and to try new and, again, innovative ways to do that. But the success is really not there.
Well, the reason I couldn't find the slide is because I've reworked it, and this is the slide I was looking for. And as you can see, the neutron breaks up into the atom and the and the electron. So this is, and then it creates the PM tick. So if we were to see that the reason that this picture is correct is because it takes into account all the energies. Otherwise, the energies don't balance. So if in the conventional science you take the mass of the electron and the proton does not equal that of the neutron, and there's a difference. So we just kind of round it off, right? But that's not the way it works in the universe. We are very specific. It'd be like when you wake up in the morning, if we were to wake up in the morning the way we run our life, you might wake up, and you'd be beside the bed. Now you say, oh, hey, I'm on the floor beside the bed and my body's in the bed. Oops, I missed, and then how do you correct that? So the universal laws are very, very specific. You hit the bullseye every time. Now, you may not always, fit just right. And so I didn't understand that principle until I was told, well, if you wake up in the morning and you feel kind of out of sorts, well, just go back to and have a nap for about 20 minutes and allow your soul to resort itself. It just didn't quite, it didn't quite fit snugly enough in its pocket, if you will. So let it go out and come back in again. We do that with our computers, right? When the computers go bonkers, we have to reset them. So you kind of reset the positioning of the soul, but nevertheless, the soul will always hit your body. It won't miss. So the target shooting is precise. This becomes very, very important. And then when we look at our souls, are all the souls the same? Well, we'd have to ask that question with the answer, are all neutrons the same? Are all electrons the same? Are all protons the same? Right now,
That was going to be my question, Alex. Are the proton and electron the same as the neutron? Because it looks like if you picture the structure of a plasma, the antimatter, the principle, and the transition, it looks like they're all equal. And I try to relate that to in the beginning, the neutron split into electron and proton. But this shape is smaller for the electron and the proton as regards to the neutron. But in actual sense, are they the same? That was going to be the question which you were talking about.
well, so they're not going to be the same because we know, mathematically by mass that they don't equal. There was something missing. And, in simple terms, we could say, well, that was the PM tick, which is the energy that was required for the binding. But if it's no longer binding, then what is it doing? So it's going somewhere. We don't know where. But as far as this equation is concerned, we have a binding. But in the process of discussing this particular binding issue, the neutron dissolves. The neutron disappears. The electron and the proton become created. Well, okay, so the one creates the two. But how do the two then create the one? Where did the one come from? So this was the confounding thing, why in book number 3, we call it the creation of the universe, where in book number 1 is the creation of the matter. And so to your question, the coming together of the antimatter and the dark matter and the matter are all at different field strengths. This is the whole confounding thing. When we, let's say you make dinner for your family, you'd be bringing all the elements for the food together, but they're all in physical state. Now, in the plasma state, they would all be in different energy states. Some would be physical, some would be plasmatical, and some would be in a transition state. So each state is an order of magnitude, and then we're not saying one order of magnitude. It could be multiple orders of magnitude. There is no limitation. So we like to climb one step at a time. But, you can jump 2 steps at a time or 3 steps at a time or even more. So there's no limitation on that. And this is the point. So what we're trying to do is to give a understanding of how the energy will split and what is the result of that energy splitting. But it doesn't say, when you say neutron and you look at that neutron, is that carbon? Is that silicon? Is that copper? Why does each of those elements have a neutron? And are they all the same? And if they are all the same inside, just saying, if they're all the same inside, then the outside is different. So should we then discriminate? Oh, yeah. Well, we like gold, we don't like copper. Well, the earth does discriminate because copper has a purpose, gold has a purpose, and all things are working in combination. So, you could very easily argue and say, why should you organize a meal you know, with the meat and the potatoes and the vegetables. And why don't you just make one big mush out of it? Because you're going to do that in your stomach anyway, you know, because it wouldn't taste the same. And taste affects the emotion. And so the emotion can change the energy transaction. So if you have a choice between a short order cook and a gourmet chef, and you say, well, what's the difference? Well, it's about $180,000 a year difference. So the gourmet chef will feed you, and you won't have an upset stomach. But a short order cook could feed you, and you know, you could have heartburn within minutes. And so that's the difference in the quality. And this is something that we need to understand. Quality is a nebulous description. There's good quality, there's bad quality. A neutron is a nebulous description. There's a neutron of the carbon, there's the neutron of the gold. Does that mean that the electron and the proton have the same? At this point in time, I can not say. But
It
one
does.
thing
It's
is that,
replicating itself, isn't it?
well, when you look at the periodic table of elements, the number on the periodic table of elements is the number of protons. And each proton has to have an electron. So the imbalance comes when you take care of that relationship with the neutron. That imbalance was the reason I got involved with the plasma science, because no one has ever been able to explain the difference between the mass of the neutron and the electron-proton combination. So we can understand, we can explain the periodic table of element number, which is based on integers. We say, oh, well, carbon is 6 and nitrogen is 7, oxygen is 8. Okay. And so that reflects the number of protons and therefore reflects the number of electrons. But how many neutrons are there? Well, we just arbitrarily give a mass to a neutron and then divide it into the element. But it doesn't add up. There's always a bit left over. We got to fudge it somehow. So why do we have to fudge it? And so then you look at the conformity of the crystalline structure of the element, and you say, well, they're not all the same. So they're not all playing by the same rules of path link and susceptibility, but they are. They are, because by changing the crystalline formation, you change the tensity. So you have to have the gravitational aspect, you have to have the magnetical aspect of it, otherwise it wouldn't exist. So if the neutron breaks up into an electron-proton only and dissolves, then it doesn't exist. Now you have an electron-proton combination, but that combination has to be a magnetical gravitational relationship that has been transferred from the neutron. In addition to that, the PM tick has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship, otherwise it wouldn't exist. So now you have where you have the neutron in its singularity, you have the atom in its duality, and then you have the PM tick in its singularity. Okay, so how do you determine the difference between the singularity and the duality? Because you are observing the rules of magnetical and gravitational force fields of attraction and repulsion. But there's another factor, and that has to do with the tensity of the attraction and the tensity of the repulsion. And if you need the two forces, the attraction and repulsion to work together, if you need the two force fields of magnetical and gravitational to work together, then you also need the two types of tensity, intensity and outtensity, and they have to work together. It's a pattern that just follows. We're using different names, but if you say magnetical and gravitational, so that means there is a construct. But that doesn't tell you what kind of construct. You don't know if it's gold or if it's copper or if it's water. So even when you look at the balance between the magnetical gravitational relationship between the electron and the proton, that exists between the hydrogen and the oxygen. So with the differences, you have an atomic structure or you have a molecular structure, and we call it water. And then you find that the water can dissolve and the water can combine, and the water has different energy states. And this is the attraction to this planet. And what is the main source of intensity for this planet? And that is the oxygen. So everything is derived from that point of intensity. Now, can we leave that point of intensity and maintain our magnetical gravitational relationship, maintain our MAGRAV status, if you will, and transmute to a different field? Can we do that? We can do that by maintaining our magnetical gravitational force fields and transmuting and maintaining the balance between the intensity and the outtensity. And then at some point, when we are satisfied, then we can release. So the electron and the proton are able to release, but if they release, they will suffer the same fate as the neutron. They will cease to exist. So this is the same is true for the intensity and the outtensity. But there is one overriding exception, and that is the soul is linked up to the soul of the creator. And that is the strongest bond of all. Thanks for your question, Ike. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah, I didn't think the neutron disappears. When the mother, I mean, when you go through this process of division or decay, does the mother disappear? Or in this picture we're seeing on the screen, when the larger universe creates the smaller and the a bigger universe, does that universe disappear? I don't think so.
It
Isn't that
becomes
the
part of it.
example?
It goes in, it becomes part of the essence. It becomes part of the entire.
What becomes part of it?
I would think the neutron will become part of the electron and proton.
No, as I understand, here's the larger universe. It's decaying and it's giving off, it's emitting a smaller and a bigger universe, but that one still is intact as I understand it. The neutron doesn't disappear. It just got pregnant and gave birth.
It has that option.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
So if you have enough mass,
So,
then
but Alex, so where is the universe? Because where's the universe then? Because it has to be within. It has to be part of it. That's the way I look at it.
I know, but the thing is that the universe is part of the unicos. That's the way we have to look at it from now on.
Okay, any further discussion on this?
So let me just elaborate.
Of course.
Ike. Let's say Ike, let's say your universe is a kidney. So you're within your universe. You have your containment, and it's a kidney, and everything within the kidney has functionality. But the kidney is different from the pancreas. And so the functionality of the kidney has a responsibility to the body, but cannot do everything that the body needs. So now you have a pancreas. So the pancreas is one universe, the kidney is another universe, and the two are within the universe of the body.
Which should be the universe, right?
In that regard, the body would be the universe. That's correct.
Correct. So everything is within. So when the neutron splits to the proton and electron, and asking where the neutron goes, that it doesn't disappear. It all becomes part. It's all within the same universe. The proton and electron is within the
That's correct.
The neutron.
That's correct.
Yeah.
However, when the body dies, it decomposes and it dissolves. And so the same thing can happen with the neutron. But what we have to understand is that there's no garbage in the universe. When you create one thing, you also create another thing. And we never look at that other thing because we're only interested in what we produce. So it's like putting a movie together. You have all this film, you splice it and you mix it up and you put it in a sequence, and then you have a lot left over, and whatever's left over, you sweep it into another pile because what you wanted to do was to assemble this film. And so that is the product that you were after. Everything else is scrap. And some people have discovered that there's a wealth of knowledge in that scrap, and if they could salvage that and put it together in another story, a different story, so it's still part of the same neutron, if you will. So the root neutron will resurrect because it was all scrap, which meant it was garbage. It was dissolved completely. But someone resurrected it. So the energy that was manifest into that scrap is now manifest back into another film. So that becomes the creation of the matter. But in order for that to happen, there had to be an external input, an offsetting to create that. We are missing the offsetting. Okay, so something is causing a separation, and that separation could be a dissolution or it could be a creation. So if a copper wire is giving off electricity, it is not consuming itself in the process. It becomes catalytic. But if you start grinding the edge of that wire, then it becomes consumed and transformed into sparks. So now the wire is getting smaller. Well, if the wire or getting shorter, if the wire is getting shorter, it has less neutrons. That's why it's getting shorter, because you're converting every atom of that copper into a spark. So you can't say that spark is a copper. That spark is an energy from the copper. But now, is there a rule that says that energy from that spark with the copper flavor If it is going to manifest or remanifest or resurrect back into the physicality, that it is mandated to be copper? And the answer is no, unequivocally no. Because the energy is bound in the construct of the magnetical gravitational force fields. And it is the intensity and outtensity of these force fields that determine the physical manifestation and the positioning. Are you still there? Is everybody still there? Or
Oh, yeah, we're here.
running out of the room?
Any other discussion on this that anyone would like to bring, or another topic? I was wondering, Carolyn or Ike, do you want to give us any updates on the issues in your area? I know the North Carolina situation seems to be going to get some more attention. And I don't know if you've seen anything happening there yet, Carolyn or Ike, if you'd like to share anything about what's happening. Are situations solved? Continuing?
Oh yeah, I'm okay with it. Thank you.
Say again?
I said I'm okay. Thank you. I understand. Thank you.
No, I mean the situation, the fire and all the rest of this. Is this getting settled? And I was referring to Carolyn as well, where I think that area in North Carolina has gotten neglected, and maybe we're going to see some more attention paid. Have you seen anything like that so far, Carolyn? The Army Corps of Engineers being brought in to do some bigger work?
It's hard for me to see anything because I live
Okay.
on top of a mountain.
Okay. Well, you'll hear word of mouth, and you'll probably see or hear some
Yeah.
interactions.
I'm working with FEMA. They've been working with me, and I'm pleased with the response.
Good.
But it's capped at 42,000. So if anybody has major damage, they're going to need more help than that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just know my personal experience, and I know that Samaritan's Purse has been doing a lot of housing for people, building little places and getting people situated. I think they're one of the most productive ones, and there's several more
I'd
charity
love to,
organizations.
yeah, I'd love to see, as he said, I open up the briefcase in Tehran or Iran where they were going to do the conference, and you'll see the creation of the UFO. Why couldn't we take a small corner of LA, of North Carolina, of Gaza, of Ukraine, and other areas, and just open up a suitcase and allow houses to basically create themselves? In a way, as he said with the UFO, you'd see the shimmering in the fields and you would see the manifestation of it. Maybe it's not time for that yet, but that would be a beautiful way, because he said we had to master some of these things before we go out into the universe, and building walls or structures, I think, is part of that. That may come
Yeah,
later.
it'd be really nice if we had the technology, but I think the real estate mongering that goes with these tragedies is over the top. I get calls all the time from
Yeah,
realtors wanting me to sell my land and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the
So,
builders and the material suppliers, whether it's in Gaza or as President Xi is overlooking the Ukraine, trying to get massive contracts, they're rubbing their hands because a lot of money is going to be exchanged and made on this process. But Mr. Kesh could certainly short circuit that, couldn't he? Putting up
yeah, it
structures
would be
that
nice
could
to
be.
get the greed out of
Hmm.
the way, and I think the plasma technology really does that in a really splendid way. So it's raising our consciousness and growing up and
Yeah,
growing into a new situation rather than the same old grabbers coming around wanting to grab minerals and land. And it was a land loss, and you can see that in LA. You can see it definitely here in West North Carolina because rivers are twice as big as they used to be and gutted out what's on either side. So it was a lot of land lost in that process.
Okay, well, we hope for and pray for the best. And maybe we'll see a different. This has been going on for how many months in your area now?
It was September 28th when it happened. So it's been 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah,
4.
it's just, and it gets worse when we have weather because the debris has not been cleaned up. They've hired people to clean the debris, and they took what they wanted and left the rest. So you just have that kind of thing going on, and you still have. I've noticed a lot of people are just, you can't put anything out on your front porch because somebody will come and steal it. There's just the crime rate. We never had that before. You could do what you want to, not worry about being gone the next day. So there's that. And I know that's true in LA too, the people coming in and wanting to just pick through the
Yeah, I know they've gotten some looters there. And what are the temperatures like where you are? Cold?
It finally got up to 44 today, and it's been super cold down near zero a lot. And I lost my water a couple of weeks ago, and I'm waiting for this thaw to get it back. But I've got a 2,000-foot pipe bringing it down the mountain from a spring, and I didn't realize it uprooted the windstorm, the hurricane uprooted trees and dislodged the pipe. So it was something I hadn't discovered yet because I don't go up there.
Right. And a few oasis systems could make a world of difference, I would think, for emotional balancing, feeding, the gaseous part, so many things. And this is coming. This is coming. I think Mr. Kesh may be planning or foreseeing that there will be a number of other disasters on this planet, not from war, but just from, as he said, the hurricanes, volcanoes. It's a very harsh planet. One of the most harshest, but yet at the same time, it gives us this beauty.
Yeah, I think I missed that the most is the beauty because it was so beautiful here, and that's really missing. So I don't go out very much because it makes me sad. So I stay home where I didn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just normal with anybody with a big loss like this and destruction and devastation and loss of life and all the rest. The emotional balancing seems to be very important in these times of these crises for people not to go off the deep end.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are worse areas than mine in terms of like Asheville and Swannanoa. Trump went out to that Swannanoa area. But that's where the Biltmore House is, and I said, oh, well, he probably just wanted to see the Biltmore House. It's where the money is, on Vanderbilt Mansion.
Well, hopefully we'll build more houses.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, I pass the talking stick.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Anything in Palisades, Ike, or anything you want to share?
Nothing yet. I think they still have a few traffic in towards that location. You have to be a resident to go in, so they are just allowing the residents in there. But there's no more fires.
Good. Good. Yeah, I think the president was out there was it yesterday or the day before?
On Friday, therefore.
Yeah, yeah. And
hello.
Yes, I was just going to call on you, Liz, but I want to thank you for bringing up that invitation. We did play that today, and I hope we can play it again in the One Planet. But yes, this is a huge key as Mr. Kesh said, and continuing to work to elevate these leaders because they need a
Yeah.
lot of work. So thank you for bringing that. What would you like to say?
Oh, yes, but I intend ask before explanation. I sent to you two pictures, the telegram, but is of course it's different, like elevated of the soul, but is about the plasma technology too. Because many times when the people ask to you, so it's difficult for you to explain when you not have a correct answer. I sent to you because mostly the time I observe when replicate is or extend the fields to the water from the plasma, the COP1, I think in that case, all the times appear bubbles. But when you put you compare with the other water, I don't have it. And always time, not important. It's cold day or hot day, not important. It's the same. And not important one country is the same. But I don't know, maybe Alex explained to me physical, of the physics, of the science explanation. Yeah.
Sure. I'm
You
sure you'd
see?
be glad to share.
Yeah, but there's different countries, but they're the same. Plasma water, and when they have two bubbles, at the right is not with plasma water, but at the left is with plasma water. You see, all the time is the same. All bottle is with the bubbles.
Okay,
Of course, it's energy.
shall we call in our
Yeah.
bubble expert? Alex?
Maybe Alex.
You talking to me?
Yes, of course. Thank you,
Are you a
Alex.
bubble expert?
Yes, Alex is expert to plasma because it's about the plasma. It's plasma water. The other don't have a fields from the plasma water, but the other have fields with plasma water.
So let me understand this correctly. The bottle on the left is made with plasma water.
Yes, and the same to the other picture, but there's two different countries, but it's the same.
Is it plasma water or is it bottled water on the right-hand side?
No, no, no. Okay. The first picture is plasma water from COP1. And the right picture is have two bottles. And the left is with plasma water, and the right is not plasma water. So it's for compare. And that picture is for compare.
Okay, so the question is, am I seeing this correctly? There are bubbles in all three bottles?
No, there's bubble and the right-hand picture, the one container, no bubbles. The other container has some bubbles, it appears to me. And on the left picture, we can see the bubbles clearly. So what is your
Yes.
question, Lisbeth?
My question is, okay, all the time in plasma water appear all time, always they not important the water is hot day or cold day or snow day like this. All the time have bubbles in plasma water. But you see the picture at the right, and two bubbles, the right bubbles not have bubbles because it's not plasma water.
Yeah,
What
I have
is
a lot
the-
of plasma water and I don't see a lot of bubbles in it.
Yes, yes, you see, more or less, okay. Maybe the picture is not better, but do you see more of the bottom?
Yeah, we can see the bubbles.
Yeah, see the
Well,
bubbles.
I see the bubbles in my plasma
The
water.
bubbles.
Mhm.
Yeah, plasma water only. Yeah,
Yeah. So the thing is that the bubbles are full of air, and the oxygen is way bigger than the hydrogen.
Yeah.
Now, the oxygen cannot exist alone. So the main reason the redox reaction, which is with the alkaline water, is the transference of energy through the oxygen. And the oxygen always has a partner. So it's always O2. It's never in singularity. And this is one of the problems with the water formula. So what you're seeing here in my estimation, my explanation is that these are oxygen bubbles, which are indicative of the high energy that's in the water. So it's different. It's not carbonation. You can see bubbles in liquids that are carbonated, but those are acidic. This water is alkaline, and so these bubbles are oxygen. And so it's representative of the energy that is bound in the water. And you know, the gas is of a higher energy state than the liquid, as the liquid is a higher energy state of the solid. But you know, even in the ice, you can see the bubbles. So the field strength of the bubbles is very, very strong, and because it is highly gravitational. And this is what I was talking about today, the high intensity of the gravitational field force. We see the same thing with Rick Crammond's rotating water balls. They have a bubble in the core, and that bubble is highly gravitational. And in order to be highly gravitational, it has to be alkaline. And to be alkaline, it has to be more on the oxygen side than anything else. And so I believe these things are all true all the way across. So with the high energy, you can produce the oxygen. But with the lower energy that you have in conventional bottled water, that is physical water, not plasma water. So the only way that it would create bubbles would be through evaporation, and that cannot happen with the lid, the bottle cap holding in there. So I hope that's a good explanation.
Yes, thank you. Really, not important. The water is from the directly from the what is the from the key from the water, or you buy the water. It is the same. Not important. Is plasma water have bubbles and no plasma water never have bubbles. Thank you. And second, yeah, sorry, go, sorry.
Well, if you put the bubbled water, the bottled water in a plasma field, it should within 24 hours become plasma water, and then you will see bubbles in there.
Mostly the time is all the time, so many hours is give it the first many hours. Not important 24 or mostly the 3 or 4 hours, yes.
And the bubbles never disappear?
No, yeah. When you consume, of course, is more like a level the water, but not disappear, no.
Yeah, I just looked at some zinc, the Cup of Life 1, the CO2. I don't have any bubbles at all. Maybe mine's weak and small. I could see if you added water to fill it up, that water coming out of the tap, if you're using tap water, is sometimes if you have an aerator, you will see a lot of bubbles in the water until they dissipate.
No, and that bubbles, but bottles, all the bottles is completed with the bubbles. Only take a picture at the top, but it's all. It's like this, like the second picture. The right picture is the same. It's all bottle is completed with bubbles.
Okay.
Okay, I have to ask
And you go.
If you take the cap off the one on the pink one on the left, and you tap on
Yes.
those bubbles, they
Yeah.
disappear, don't they?
Oh, yes.
No,
Oh no?
I don't know. I use it and I got it and put again the
Refill it?
the
Yeah.
top and no, I continue. I
Okay.
see now it's continuing. Yeah, you said
I
like
see a lot of
I don't know.
bubbles when you're producing it, but I don't see a lot of bubbles after it's sitting there. A couple of these I've had for a number of years.
I have an important question
Go
for
ahead.
Liz-
Yes, go.
Elizabeth. So let's say I'm saying that those bubbles have oxygen. So the
Yes.
oxygen is one of the components of the water.
Yes, of course.
What happened to the hydrogen?
I don't know. I don't know. CO2.
Okay.
It's the hydrogen. I don't know. Mr. Case explained this maybe in, 1 week ago, but I need to learn more and understand more. So sorry.
Okay, but
Sure.
here's the point to learn. You have to see the interaction of the energy with the plastic bottle and the water inside.
Okay.
There has to be an energy transfer, and you know that carbon is part of that bottle. So if you start adding 2 hydrogen to the carbon in the bottle, that'll become oxygen. So you have the higher energy of the plasma water is now creating a field, and everything within that field is now interacting. So that includes the bottle. Now, if that bottle were made of glass, I don't think you would see the same result. My point is that you have to take everything into account, that everything is interacting all the time.
No.
So the energy is giving and taking from absolutely everything that you're looking at. But there is a difference in the rate of transfer. So some things are more dense, like metals, so they don't like to dissolve, if you will. Whereas things that are like gas, they dissolve very easily. And of course, water is in between. So they all change at a different rate. So there's always an energy exchange. And that's what you've got to look at. You have to understand that this is what you're promoting. You're promoting so the bubbles are indicating that there's a higher rate of energy exchange within the plasma water than there is in the physical water. So this is what you're seeing.
Yeah, mine are in glass, so I didn't see that.
So the main component
Maybe it's different. Yeah. I use all the time. Mostly the time I use with the cup one is water from the oh my God, domestic water.
The
But
tap.
mostly the time, yeah.
The
But
tap.
from the
Tap.
tube,
Yeah, from the tap.
yeah.
From your faucet. Yeah. That's
Yes,
that's
mostly the time.
that has usually they have a little aerator in there. And again, I think if you took the cover off, because you said you're using it quite often, so you're replenishing the water, right? You're taking the top part and then you're adding more water later. So I think that bubble is coming from the faucet myself.
I use it on complete bottle and replace, put other for the other day, for example.
Yeah, you
But
use it and you refill it with the tap.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But in the second picture, there's the right picture is one from the tube, so, but the other is by for more, mostly the time use it buy for use it, but now I put with always around the plasma. No, I'm sorry, around the guns from Coke One for use it for drinking, for use it for little cooking or all things. I use it from Coke
Mhm.
One, but mostly the time have bubbles, but never. I put pay attention now for maybe when they would replicate from the COP2 or CO2 or zinc is of course is the other the water is from the sorry I forget the
The
name.
one
The water.
with no bubbles, Lisbeth, empty that out, save that water, and then fill it up with the tap water, and I think you're gonna see some bubbles. This one, the one that's the bottled water. Just empty it out into a glass or a pitcher, fill it up with your tap water, and look for the bubbles. I think you're gonna see them.
Yeah, but
Yeah, maybe
will those bubbles
sorry.
be chlorine or will those bubbles be oxygen? That's the question. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
okay, so yes, there will be bubbles, but those bubbles will come from the water treatment plant because that's um the other chemicals that are in there. So what you're the question is if the bubbles from the first one there has on the right there are no bubbles because that is the tap waters at low energy, but the others are plasma water, and so there's an exchange of energy.
I
This is
thought she said the bottle on the right is bottled water,
yes.
that it's not from the tap.
Well, the bottled water is from the tap.
Well, yeah, it says natural
No, it's all.
spring.
Oh, is it all? Is it all? Is it all bottle? Only that picture not take a picture completed, but it's only for compare. One have water and the other not. With plasma water have bubbles, and no plasma water not have bubble, but it's for all bottles.
Okay,
All.
good question for Mr. Kesher. We'll bring that into the reactor group. Maybe we can discuss that.
Yeah. Yes, many times. I observe for many years, but today as observe her, okay, what is that? Never take a what is the explanation, and of course never take for example in CNA and zinc or CO2 with the distilled water. Never observe. Maybe I observe it and give it to you too, but that is from COP one. Bottles from COP one.
What you need to learn, Elizabeth, is to understand the energy exchange. And
Yes, I know.
you cannot get a better teacher than your cell phone because when you put your finger on the cell phone, something happens. And in order for that to happen, there has to be energy that's exchanged between your finger and the surface of the cell phone. But there's another thing that is happening in the background, and that is you. You want to put your finger on the cell phone. Without you wanting to put your finger on the cell phone will never see the finger. So you are the driving force. You put your finger on the cell phone, and then the energy from your finger is exchanged with the cell phone. And then where you touch the screen, it represents an action. And you can specify that action. So this is how we can dictate the kind of energy exchange. If we could take that perfection, how we can exchange energy with a cell phone, and do that with our plasma reality, then we have truly advanced. And then there will never be war, because we will always see the relationship when we promote the war, the energy exchange. It'll be devastating. So why would we want to do that? So that's part of the learning lesson. If you don't learn that lesson, then you carry on doing the same thing. That's the problem with the warmongers. They never send their children into war. They always send your children. So if they were to send their children in the war, then they get the message and say, oh, you know, your child died in battle, and then how do you feel? And it affects you emotionally. And that is an emotional feeling that you cannot express in words. And if you say, well, someone else's child died in battle, and I'm saying, oh, well, I'm very sorry for your loss, but that loss cannot compare to if that child was your child. So the emotion would be stronger, and the reaction would be stronger. So that's the whole purpose of life and learning the lessons. If we learn the lesson, then we may not require a lot of energy to be input. But if we're stubborn and we don't learn the lesson, then the lesson needs to be harder. More energy needs to be put in. So this is what we have to always understand, that there's an energy exchange. Everything we come into contact with is always in exchange. You cannot walk around, shall we say, with a bubble around you. In order for that bubble to exist, it's depending on the energy that you're feeding. It is also depending on what it comes in contact with. So if you have a bubble and someone comes with a needle, they'll burst your bubble. So how can you come in contact with somebody that they don't burst your bubble? That's the lesson you have to learn. And so you have to understand what it is that the other field is giving and taking, and what are you giving and taking. And if it's not compatible, well, then you have to seek refuge. You know, if I may take another minute, Mark, please. There is I was talking about the expansion into the aura. So the aura grows, and then once the aura grows, the physicality can grow within the aura. So the aura allows a space for that to grow. If you look at a lobster, the lobster has an exoskeleton. So we have a skeleton inside. The lobster has a skeleton on the outside. How does it grow? It literally has to take the skeleton off, the way you may take off, your clothes, your jacket or whatever. But at that point in time, the skin of the lobster is very, very soft. And at that point in time, it can expand. And then it'll expand, and it'll expand to a certain point. Okay, so there's a limit to that expansion. And the limit of that expansion is determined by the balance between the tensity and the outtensity. The intensity and the outtensity balance will determine how fast it grows and how far it grows. Now, the surface tension will change, and at that point, the field strength will change. And instead of that skin being soft, that skin will manifest into a hard exoskeleton. And I believe that takes about 3 to 4 days. But during that period of time, the lobster has to be in a safe place of refuge, because it is susceptible to being attacked. Once it has the exoskeleton, it can come out, and it will be able to protect itself with a shield against the harsh environment. So this is the nature of the growth. So we always have to create a field to grow into that field. And if that field is a hard field, then we will not grow. And if that field is a giving field, has a lot of out tensity, then we can grow into that field. And we can expand our gravitational affinity within that field. And that's what we need to do. If we are going to transmute, we need to be able to expand that field and maintain the gravitational conformity. So that gravitational conformity is dictated by the soul, because the soul has the highest energy, and the soul is connected to the creator, who has the same high energy. So we are created in the image of the creator. So our responsibility is in the image of the creator as well. We cannot shirk our responsibility, but we think we can because we have a delay in consequences on Earth. So if the lobster doesn't understand the delay in consequences and takes off the exoskeleton, and it takes, say, 4 days for him to grow the exoskeleton back, but he wants to carry on the way as if he had an exoskeleton, well, the moment he comes into conflict, he will have no defense. So this is how we learn. So how did the lobster go to exoskeleton school? Or is that ingrained within his RNA? And
anyone who's naked always hides, Alex. You know that. Most of them anyway, except perhaps Lady Godiva.
well, you know the joke about the Swedish soccer players, right? Hockey players.
No.
The lady reporter comes into the dressing room, and all the Swedish players throw a towel over their face, and the American player puts a towel around his waist. And he didn't understand why, and so they had to explain it to him. He said, well, in Sweden, we recognize people by their face. Okay, over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Good. Just another observation here. Why are these bubbles all have migrated to the top of the bottle? When we see in this bottle, the bubbles appear to be dispersed pretty evenly throughout the whole structure. To me, this was filled up with aerated water, and the cover was left on. The bubbles want to escape, but they can't. And over here, this bottle was just filled. Now, when you're making GANs, and especially if you're using a battery, you'll see loads of bubbles in your reactor on the surface, on the walls of the reactor. But after that process stops, usually it settles down. So why so many bubbles on the top, but very few bubbles in the center? And I think this bottle here was filled up recently and the picture was taken, and that's why we see them spread out pretty ubiquitous, or, throughout the whole structure. That's just my observation.
Yeah,
Well,
yes, that's correct. More little at the center and more
Yeah.
at the bottom have more too. It's all the border, but more little at the center. That's correct. Yes, but this is in all the bottom.
Mm.
Only take a picture for represent the bubble. So sorry, not take a picture completed.
Yeah, no problem.
but
That's
if you
just
look
my
at
observation. No problem.
if you look at the pink bottle, you notice that the taper goes to the top. And so based on surface to volume ratio, the top is negative and the oxygen is positive. So yes, it'll move to the top.
Yeah, it's trying to escape.
No, it's attracted. There's an attraction.
Like I
And
said, if you take the cover off and you tap the bottle, you'll see and get rid of all those bubbles. You'll probably see the bubbles will not reappear. That's been my experience.
yeah, but by taking the cap off, you have changed the dynamic of the energy exchange.
Sure.
That's all I'm saying. So if you change the field strength, you will change the susceptibility.
You think taking the cap off changed the field strength?
Yeah.
Okay.
You've changed the tensity of the field. The field is contained within the bottle. You open the cap, the field now becomes part of the rest of the building.
Okay.
Doesn't matter how big or how small the area, when you have gas, it'll fill up the whole thing.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions before we close? We want to thank everyone for being here. And of course,
I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present, and thank you for all your questions. Thank you so much.
And of course, as Mr. Kesh said, he's very congratulatory of all the work that everyone's done. And this was a little keychain that we received, I think it was in Manchester. May you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference we're all making. As we understand, we're all carrying a very small piece of this very large carpet. And remember to support the Kesh Foundation. I'd like to play that very short clip about John and how the lady who went into the pyramid with a magrev in the room, and she said she levitated, and Mr. Kesh indicated they'd done this with John a few times. But as he said, can you replicate it? And I think this is one of the issues that we're having.
Okay.
Yes?
I'm sorry.
No.
Only invite again, please, Mr. Kesh, invite too for continued support Kesh Foundation with the soul. Continue pray to the your own creation, your own creator for unifying the souls, because now need more strongest that soul, because we are the soul of the peace. Thank you so much.
Yes, that's what I tried to emphasize. Our best tool in our toolbox is the work with your energy dimension to reach these leaders, these religious leaders. We stress that quite a bit. And we have been stressing that's the best tool as we start. And also we're learning about ourselves and this other dimension in that process, and that we can interchange energies without a question. But yes, Mr. Kesh said we had 4 or 5 months to bring the change. This is the window of opportunity. And as he said in this last workshop, as well as the one before, that President Trump, in a way, has set the stage. Again, we don't need Trump or we don't need the woman, but we certainly need governments, as Mr. Kesh said. This will never come into the market without the governmental assistance.
Yeah, now it's very important because all decisions taken the new administration affected positive or not the other nations. So it's very important elevate the soul all leaders, because all leaders need work together and construct one nation. Not what is most from the others. No. It's only all around the world is one nation. Of course, when they elevate the soul of all leaders, you elevate the message. Of course, elevate the followers, that leader, because that message is follow the message. The people follow that message. Of course, the people change your behavior. And of course, all around the world, all souls elevate the soul of the planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, as we say, and Mr. Kesh indicated that these politicians, many of them are just spokespeople. And by elevating them, we're actually reaching the people behind them or behind the curtain as well. So there's a lot of things going on in this process, but as we understand, we have the mother connection through the soul of the Creator.